Welcome to the Growth Shift. I'm David Zilstra. Here's what I've learned after years in business. Every leader who's built something meaningful has a story, but the moment they had to shift, when failure forced innovation, when change became opportunity, when they chose growth over comfort. On this show, we dive into those pivotal moments, the setbacks that became breakthroughs, the strategic shifts that accelerated growth, and the frameworks that turn obstacles into opportunities. Because here's the truth. In a world where change is the only constant, the leaders who thrive aren't the ones who avoid failure. They're the ones who've learned to shift strategically through it. So whether you're facing your own pivot point or just want to learn from someone who's been there, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Today, we're joined by Marnie Robbins, founder of Vibe People Studio, who made a bold leap from traditional HR roles in corporate tech to building a consulting practice that helps organizations activate their culture from the leadership level down. After experiencing firsthand the bruises and battles of startup culture, Marnie pivoted from treating HR symptoms to addressing the root cause, helping companies intentionally design and activate the workforce culture they actually want, not just the values that hang on the wall. Marnie, welcome to the Growth Shift.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
So, Marnie, you started way back when in recreation, park, and tourism. How the heck did you end up to where you are now?
Much by accident. Yes, my degree program was in rec park and tourism, and I was going to travel and write and do all the things. And then got my first job right out of college, and it was as an HR assistant in a manufacturing facility of all places. And so I just kind of got sucked into the world of HR and a few times tried to get out of it, actually. And then they just kept pulling me back in until I found the right direction and focus for me.
What do you feel was pulling you out of HR? And then at the same time, also, why did you stay? What was keeping you?
Good question. So really what was pulling me out of it was the misalignment with what I perceived to be my personal values. Back when I started, I'm not going to date myself, but back when I started, HR very much was an administrative function solely for disciplinary actions, policies, procedures, handbooks, you name it. And for me, my whole goal in life was to be creative and to be human centered and human design. And so that pull was to follow more work that meshed with my individual purpose. What pulled me back in was I took a job at a technology company as their employee development and recruitment. I'm like, well, development and recruitment, that's at least the more positive side of HR. So let's take a stab at this. And they had a new CEO who had been appointed and quite the visionary. And the first thing they did when I started that role was say, I want you to be different by design. That was always the approach. Be different by design. Don't do things just because traditionally that's the way things have been done. All of a sudden, with that human centricity and the way that they approach things and really taking their culture and their values to action, I was hooked at that point. So then it gets contagious and it's like, I want to find more of that in the work that I do.
Okay, neat. So it hooked you, it kept you around. How did that develop? I mean, you didn't stay where you are, obviously. You landed in startup culture after working for tech companies. I mean, what drew you to startup companies?
I think being able to be that first guy in, sweeping the floors while creating something new. Always that creation piece and that, I like the scrappiness and the fast pace and the change and doing something new all of the time. However, with that comes with a lot of bumps and bruises. After a while, you get a little, I hate to say PTSD from some startups that may not act as nicely as others, but it's definitely the environment of creation and building something that pulls me in.
And now today with Vibe People Studio, you're not technically an HR consultant, right? You're doing quite a bit more than that. So would you say you're still in HR or has it evolved and grown beyond that?
HR is still a part of my business and in some relationships that I have with clients. It's always going to be. I think it's always going to be attached to, just my background and what I bring. I can't help it. Someone said the other day, I see a bowl of candy, I'm going to pick up a piece, right? But where I did pivot, when I started off in my consulting journey, I literally just was like, I'm going to be a fractional people operations executive. And I sloughed off the HR. I was almost embarrassed by HR and wanted to move more on the people side. But really, where things have pivoted as of late in my business is I think I can have more impact on the HR industry at scale by saying we can do this differently. So working with both organizations who are looking to activate their cultures and go beyond a people ecosystem that's just policy, procedure, you name it, and actually infusing their values into that. But then also how do we actually support these HR professionals who are trying to do the same things in their organizations, who maybe have the vision and the desire to do that, but they stall. So I have a partnership with Mindy Honkoop. It's called Alt HR Hive, and that's the community piece of how do we build up these professionals who have maybe hit that wall or just trying to get a little more strategic in the way that they approach things. So that's really exciting too.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like something interesting there happened, along this journey. I mean, initially you weren't interested in AR, you landed in it, you were trying to leave, you were pulled back in, you were hooked, you stayed, but then you kind of left again after a little while, right? And then now you're back in it again. So it's almost like you've come full circle. But I mean, what caused that? I mean, you were initially, it wasn't something you were interested in. You were drawn in by what you saw, you were hooked, and then you're almost pushed away again eventually. Was there something there that, kind of caused that distancing eventually?
Yeah, I think the world of HR and people ops has for a very long time been torn into two. They've been damaged on both sides of the coin. We get into it because we've seen these great cultures and these great companies. We've been hooked by these leaders who get it right, but they're few and far between. So when I did get in, it was because I could see how it worked, and I was literally a business leader. I've been a part of some really great leadership teams and been at the table, not just at the table, but involved at the table and doing things outside of the scope of HR and people ops. So that was really exciting. Where your heart gets broken and where you start to pull out of it is at the moments of change and transformation. A lot of times the person in the HR and the people ops seat, they really get the brunt of both the employees because they've had to either communicate decisions that were made that weren't made by them, but that's their role in bringing that to the rest of the company. But then also there's that lack of clout. We're a cost center, right? And so the first time companies go to cut budgets or times get tough. I mean, we went through COVID, that was tough. And then you go through economic changes and all of a sudden HR's mission, vision, purpose is a little different at that point or non-existent in some. And so that's why you see a lot of professionals going into like fractional human resources work. I mean, it's just crazy out there. There's so many fractional HR and people ops pros right now, which is great. They're taking their power, but it is pretty noisy today. And I think that that's a symptom of how we've treated those professionals in the past. So getting out of it, I was looking internally at me and saying, okay, having the same experience of like, what's out there and how do I kind of take my own power back and build something for myself, not just another company. And so then as it just happens that there's so many people out there like me, and I have had the ability to be a part of organizations where it can work, that's where it kind of pulled me back in. And my purpose shifted a little bit from introspective to how do I help people who have been in my shoes and make them more impactful in what they do.
Interesting. So, I mean, there's a few things you mentioned there. I'm just trying to connect some dots, right? You mentioned being battered and bruised along the way. You mentioned good leadership, but you mentioned that was, few and far between. You mentioned poor leadership as well. And you're also saying that you recognize somewhere that you just wanted to take a little bit more control of that outcome. And I think maybe perhaps the inputs that you were having. I mean, did something happen along the way? Was there one moment that you said, things need to change. I need to do things differently?
That's a really good question. I think it was probably a series of events. When you look at my resume, there's a few stints in different companies. And I think There's not just good companies and bad companies. There's companies who have their own positive traits and negative traits, right? But in my roles, I've always been a part of some sort of change or transformational event. That's why people bring me into their organizations, is we're going through either high growth or we are going from an enterprise organization to more SaaS-like in nature, and we need to change the way that we approach our people ecosystem, things like that. So every one of these experiences comes with this amazing strength building, experience. However, it also comes with a little bit of, okay, that change is over, that transformation is over, and I'm a little bruised and battered at the end of it. So having some of the great experience, one of my best bosses that I've ever had who grew me the most, when I left, I was extremely stressed out and I needed to actually take some healing time. It doesn't mean I regret that time there, but I needed to just shift my focus. So I guess to your point, it wasn't one thing. It was a look back historically at my career journey, what I've learned, what I've taken away, what I feel that I can actually bring to the greater masses, so to speak, and making that my own. I was opportunistic when I went out on my own. I had a company that just got to that point of, hey, we're not in scale at this moment. Is this a full-time role? I was like, well, tell you what, let me make you a client instead of an employer, and I'll go build something for me, and we'll continue that relationship. And so that's actually what kickstarted Vibe People Studio.
Very cool opportunity. It's nice when things kind of, come together, or, maybe the universe had it pre-written, we could say, whatever way you look at things. But, Marnie, you've seen, I suppose you could say, both sides of the coin in organizations, right? You've seen the good, you've seen the not so good, let's say, and now you're working with companies as a consultant to help leaders create the culture that you've seen and maybe avoid the culture you've seen as well.
Yes.
How do you feel that your experience has shaped your leadership philosophy and the way that you approach advising clients?
It shifted my focus of what I was actually working on. So when I used to try to come up with a people strategy based on employee feedback surveys only, like, the top 3 things that came from this survey, those are going to be my KPIs or my OKRs or what we're looking for. Feedback's invaluable. It's gold. I can't stress that enough. But if we're going to look forward and we're going to think strategically, we really have to focus on leading indicators. What is out there in the world from a business perspective? What type of challenges are we going to have as a business, and how does people play into that? What type of culture do we need in order to get our team working in an environment? Like, how are they making those decisions? What behaviors are they displaying? So a lot of times when I come into an organization, they say, okay, well, what kind of values and behaviors do we need? Well, it's more than that. Like, let's get really intentional about what do you aspire to as a company. Let's take the values that you've either created or not created. We can help with that. And then let's talk about what that means in practice. So there's 2 areas: leadership principles. Number 1, I think leadership principles are so important. What do values mean and how do we lead? Because the leaders are at the front lines of your culture activation. Like, leaders can make or break your culture. So how are we treating the way that we lead? Is it consistent? Is it a way that is in keeping what we would like external, people to see our company? And then beyond that, what behaviors within our values? So what does it mean to actually work collaboratively? What does that look like in our organization, and how do we evangelize and then lead toward that? So I think that big shift of, if you really want a good culture, you can't just throw stuff up on the board. You can't give swag out. I mean, all those things are fun, and definitely a part of it, but it's that leadership bit, that point of how we actually create the environment. That's the key to building the culture. Or you can't even build your culture. Your culture exists, but it's the key to fostering the culture that you're striving to have.
Okay. You said, I'd like to dive into this a little bit further. There's something that I'm curious about here, really. I mean, we're talking about culture, but we're also talking about, what companies are working toward and striving for in the future, right? Now, there are companies who prioritize growth, especially the ones who are trying to move fast, over culture at times. And say, I mean, if we look at startup culture, for example, you need the right people. You need people who are willing to work overtime, put in the extra hours, have a big vision, who are willing to work as a small team as part of a unit in all of this as well. But I imagine that mindset doesn't always leave founders. Have you ever been in a situation where you're working with a company or a founder or leadership team who want to prioritize growth even at the cost of their culture?
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine if you ask that founder like straight blank that's what they want to do, they'd say no. But it's a really hard muscle to let go of. So these founders, that's their baby. It's their blood, sweat, and tears. And so it's really hard to say we're not in startup mode or growth mode, and that first group that is within an organization, I mean, they are the ones that are building, that are working the excessive hours and all of that. But I think to your point, it's twofold. So culture should and does need to evolve as a company evolves. I was just having a conversation with someone, a previous colleague of mine, who was saying, we're still acting like it's a startup culture. I mean, we're almost 10 years in and I'm exhausted. This is not sustainable. So the smart founders are actually saying, okay, yes, there's the time for growth and grittiness, but how do we grow with sustainability and in a healthy fashion? So yes, I have definitely come across the founders who really struggle to get out of that growth and work at all costs mentality. And sometimes that's at the detriment to their company. The turnover starts to happen. You start seeing really kind of that toxic environment. And frankly, a lot of times that's when they call someone like me, of like, hey, we see these symptoms, right? We see people leaving. We see low eNPS scores. We see, customer success scores, dropping. And we have an idea that it's related to employee engagement. And then, come to find out that growth at all cost is really causing fatigue, burnout, and disengagement.
And I mean, like with these things internally in a company, do you find that leadership needs to recognize it themselves and then reach out for help for a solution? Or, I mean, is this something that, consultants such as yourself can perhaps be a little bit more proactive about, identify some of these companies, whether they're going through, high growth or funding rounds, rebranding, whatever it is, so that you can kind of more systematically, help people before they realize that maybe they need it, put out the fires before they start, so to speak?
It's such a good question, and I see where you're going, because that's so true. A lot of times companies, by the time they do realize it, it's probably too late, or they just have so many fires they can't even see the forest through the trees. But to your point, a lot of times when I'm looking at companies, I'm looking at recent series, events, different transformational events. I'm actually trying to look for companies that are going through those change and transformational times and trying to understand, okay, well, how many employees do they actually have right now? What pain points do I think they might be feeling at that moment? And those pain points, I get it. And this might be a symptom of a larger issue. So that's actually been something I had to develop over time, that mindset of don't wait for them to come to me with the pain point, but start to acknowledge where they are and come with the medicine.
I mean, how do you, it sounds like a lot of work. I mean, are you kind of just keeping tabs on companies you'd like to work with and then approaching them when you feel the time is right? Or, I mean, like, how does growth at a company such as yours as a consultant, what does that actually look like?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard, especially when it's yourself. You're really, I've done the LinkedIn Navigator. That's a full-time job in and of itself. I've done a lot of just networking, spending a lot of time in network and whatnot, and really, getting to the point where opportunistically through network of, as you see things in your network that pop up and getting into the DMs and the LinkedIn of like, hey, how you doing? I see you're going through some change. That's really exciting. And letting those people know more education of what I do. I don't approach people directly to say, hey, I have your solution and this is what I'm going to offer. But I do approach them with here's some resources, happy to have you be a connection, and hope that when they do start to see those red flags, they'll come knocking.
And providing value and, letting them know you're there. And then, as you said, leaving the door open so they can come along, right?
Yeah.
Now, I'd love to take a look and just learn a little bit more about, what it is you do and how you operate as well. I mean, as an individual consultant, things can be challenging, right? You just alluded to one challenge there. You tried the LinkedIn Sales Navigator thing, but it's a job in itself, right? You're managing everything right now. When we look at, your approach to consulting companies and culture, right, whether it's how much their staff are working. I mean, you're the only staff, but of course you need to maintain a culture yourself as well. What's your process like for making sure that you're managing yourself as a company? Is that something that you keep in mind as well, your own individual culture as a company additionally?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's taken time, but definitely the use of tools. I mean, it sounds cheesy, but I do block, time to work on the business itself. My goal is to scale. I don't want to be a solopreneur for years, and so definitely want to increase my network and my team and scale to have more customized solutions for my clients because they're all at a different point in their evolution. So, from a process perspective, I do block the time where it's like, nope, this is Vibe People Studio time, or this is Alt HR Hive time. I'm meeting with Mindy tomorrow. So it's making sure that we have that really intentional time to build beyond what we're doing from the day to day. Because when you're doing the client work, you can get sucked in really quick to that client work. The other thing that I do is I use Reclaim.ai to coordinate all my calendars to make sure that everything is good there, and it actually analyzes like this is where you're spending your time this week, and so I try to pay attention to it, get healthy scheduling habits. One of my coaches at one point said, make sure you do the things that make the money first in the day. So I do the things that make the money first. I make sure that I'm improving my current client's condition at all times, but then making sure that I unplug from that at a certain time. The other thing is just I actually track my time. How much time are you spending where using tools to say, okay, Marnie, you spent way too much time on this particular project. We're going to have to adjust and reprioritize. But it's tough.
I imagine, like, just as you said, maintaining that balance can be tough, right? Tracking your schedule and the hours you're putting in, of course, it's very important. But I mean, here you are as an HR and a culture consultant, not just an HR consultant. I don't want to put that label on you, but you're a culture consultant, right? You're maintaining your own culture as well, but you're limited in time, right? You want to scale. So when you're looking at scaling, how is it that you're beyond what you mentioned right now, right? Because you're using some systems to manage time now, but when you look at scaling beyond what you're doing now, how do you manage that, or how are you approaching that without losing the personal touch that is really required in what you do?
That's what a lot of people in the consulting space that I've come across that they struggle with, because a lot of times your sales process and why people chose you to come into their organization is because of you and because of that trust and that personal relationship that you've established with them through that discovery process, or that network connection that you have, etc. So where I'm actually struggling currently is how do I systematize a lot of what I do, but then also find the team that can bring that to fruition, but still within keeping of my brand and my approach, that type of warmth that I'm hoping to get. And so that part has been difficult, is to get to that one to few step and get that brand consistent, but still really personal and engaged.
So, I mean, these are, of course, some pretty serious challenges for any solopreneurs or individual consultants or smaller companies as well, but there's a lot of opportunity now for making those things a little easier, right? Especially with AI coming into the mix. You've mentioned a little bit of that already. So how do you see AI? Well, how are you using AI now to help towards those goals? And how do you see it really being the most advantageous to you in the future as well with these things in mind?
Yeah, I was an early AI adopter, definitely, particularly from a solopreneur standpoint. I joke that it's my co-founder. I put a lot through ChatGPT, Gemini, particularly when it comes to how I'm building my business. So I'll have an idea. Okay, yeah, I have my ChatGPT prompted to tell me the truth, better for worse. But
Yeah.
we walk through ideas and generate frameworks and tools and all of that together. I take it and make it my own, at that point. But really, it's been a constant source of, hey, I have this idea. Let's walk through this. What am I missing? And as someone who's more of a creative, it helps me systematize some of that creative, maybe haphazard thinking that I have a lot of times. It also takes the day-to-day work that I have. So there's a lot of creating performance review templates. There's a lot of, can we look at this particular policy or this statement of process and things that are really replicable. And so that, to me, AI has just freed up so much time in that respect. Getting more into infusing AI into, like, again, my scheduling tool is AI, my, the Fathom note takers, things like that. It's just really becoming more and more ingrained. And then when it comes to HR technology, I have a lot of partnerships with AI tech. So companies like MeBot, that are really just up leveling the way that we even approach employee engagement and culture and all of that, that are helping us personalize the employee experience at scale, which has been really cool.
That's really neat. That's really neat. Now, I'd love to learn a little bit more about the fusion of a couple of things here, right? Because, I mean, your culture is clearly defined, right? You want to grow, you want to maintain balance, you want to maintain what's important to you through that as well, right? You're using AI, you're an early adopter. So we've got you on one side of the equation. On the other side, let's look at some of your clients, right? Larger companies who maybe they still want to grow, but maybe they have large workforces. Maybe their culture isn't really properly established or as strong as they'd like it to be. And here they are now perhaps wanting to approach the changing times with being an earlier adopter of AI, let's say, right? But without a cohesive culture, change within an organization, even with cohesive culture, can be very challenging, right? People, maybe they don't want to start using the AI, they don't want to change their processes. I mean, how do you approach helping a client around those cultural issues when it comes to the adoption of new tech like AI?
Oh, it's so, I mean, you hit the nail on the head of, I mean, it's change management in and of itself, whether it's AI or any technology that you implement. But there's, dependent on, I have clients that are in different sectors, some sectors that have to be a little more cautious as their approach to AI. Maybe they're dealing with, financial or even like HIPAA type data that they have to consider. But then there's other companies that are more, they're just inherently open for innovation, collaboration, experimentation, and curiosity. So if I'm in a company that is looking at, we're really interested in adopting AI in an efficient and effective fashion, but my team is kind of hiding in the corners and not really interested in adopting it. A lot of times they're like, well, what does it mean for my job? Right. And so before implementing any of these change management or any like AI adoption, well, what is the purpose? How are we going to approach this? What is it in service of? And how do we approach this culturally? I have some clients who say, this is going to free up time for our employees. And by freeing up time for our employees, we're going to give them that time back. Maybe they don't have the 40-hour work week anymore. They have more freedom to be creative and collaborative. Well, that's great intention. Have you communicated that out to the team? Have you proven that out? Then by saying, okay, here's not only what's going to happen, we want you to find tools that are going to make your job better and also going to propel us as a company at scale, but it's also going to benefit you as well. And by the way, if you do this, we're going to give you space to do this. We're going to give you funds to explore AI. We're going to give a Slack channel that says that we're going to collaborate and say, how are we learning AI and how are we implementing it into our workforce? So I've seen every side of the spectrum as far as that more collaborative, courageous, curious organization. And that does stem from culture. That comes from their values, that comes from learning together and that curiosity type value. But then you have the other organizations that have a lot more to do before they just say, hey, guess what? We're going to start using AI. We want you to as well. It's just going to fall flat and it's going to be another tool.
Definitely some things for leaders to think about when looking at this as well, right? I mean, what is your culture really like, and is it going to contribute to what it is that you want to do? Can you contribute back as well and show people that the decisions we're making, we're thinking beyond ourselves, just as, any culture should, let's say.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, you can use the fear-based approach and say, if where it's You can adopt AI and then figure out how to scale your role and still put that 40, 50, 60 hours in.
Mhm.
And that's fine, but what's going to happen is if those employees do start to learn and understand and adopt the AI, they're going to be using it to go find that next job as
Mhm.
well. So
Mhm.
I think that that's the danger that some companies that are seeing that it as just cost savings versus the ones that are seeing it as an opportunity.
Definitely food for thought. Marnie, I want to thank you so much for joining the Growth Shift today, sharing your insights, your thoughts, and your story with the audience. One more question for you.
You
Looking
betcha.
back at your own pivot from fractional consulting to industry-wide impact in a greater way, what's the one piece of advice that you'd give to other consultants or leaders who feel stuck between, playing it safe and making the bold moves that could scale their impact?
Walk around with it, talk to people. So when you have the grand scale idea, talk to people, have the conversations. Where does this break? Does this fix? Does this provide the medicine to the problems that you're having or that your clients are having? Without those conversations, we're all just trying to scale without that feedback and without that understanding. So that to me has been the biggest help. A mentor that I was just talking to this week, and I always have a new idea that I want to implement, and then I'm like really quick to want to put it on my website and update my LinkedIn profile. And she said sit on it for a month, go talk to people, and just come back around, because you're going to have better language for it, you're going to have a better idea and plan, and you're going to get it kicked off a lot easier and intentional than you would if you did it this week. So that to me has been pretty valuable, at least for me this week.
I think there's even one more parallel lesson we can draw from that before we wrap up here. I mean, most companies realize, whether they're startups or they're bigger companies, they realize that you don't solve for future problems, right? You make a decision based off of the data. So companies aren't making solutions and softwares and products without consulting their customers and their audience. What do you want, right? Taking that
Yes.
feedback and making, so it's the same within a culture as well, right? Looking into the culture when you're making change, getting feedback. How will our people respond? What do they want? What should we do? Because the people are the culture at the end of the day. Not as much as culture trickles down from the leadership, culture is the company. It is not dictated by what the company wants, right?
Exactly, exactly. There's the intention and the output, and the culture is the output. And you can intentionally infuse factors that are going to hopefully develop that culture. But yeah, the culture is the output, and that comes through the team and the
Wonderful.
product.
Marnie, for any of our listeners who might like to find you online to connect with you, what would be the best way to do so?
Yeah, so LinkedIn, I'm pretty, well, outside of summer, I'm a pretty heavy hitter on LinkedIn. I'm Marnie Robbins. Just look me up. Five People Studio. My website is fivepeoplestudio.com. I also am starting a micro community with my friend Mindy on the People Forward Network, and it's called Alt HR Hive. So keep an eye out for that if you're an HR or people ops professional that's looking to find like minded individuals and hoping to grow.
Fantastic. Thank you so much again, Marnie.
Thank you. This has been fun.
And that's a wrap on another episode of The Growth Shift. If this conversation sparked something for you, whether it's a new perspective on failure, a strategy you want to try, or just the reminder that every setback can become a setup for something bigger, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Remember, the leaders who thrive aren't the ones who avoid change. They're the ones who shift strategically through it. If you're ready to build the systems that help you grow without the chaos, head over to valentix.io. We help businesses like yours scale smarter, not harder. I'm David Zilstra, and I'll see you in the next shift.